Some good praise reports, yeah, indeed. But none of these people in this recording are going to know. So let's get this recording going. So it was a delay. So we're back on the Sermon on the Mount. This is the second week of this. And if y'all remember where we were last time, we were in the Beatitudes, and we got to Beatitude 7, Blessed are the Peacemakers. We actually got a little bit past it, but I wanted to kind of go back to it because we had so much discussion after that, after the record and all that. And I know not everybody's going to be able to see that. So that's the seventh Beatitude, Blessed are the Peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And remember, we talked about because remember, all this is greatly, anchored in the Old Testament, everything that Jesus is saying here. And so here, for the Blessed of the Peacemakers, this is just really, really prominent in Proverbs. I had two last time, but we're going to have a lot more this time. But the way these were worded, he who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. And the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is overlook a transgression. I mean, this could be seen as just overlooking sin, is not taking sin seriously. So in no way that we want it to be understood like that. So we're not talking about sin or, wolves being let loose in the midst of sheep and that type of thing. These peacemakers is undoing the conflicts and the contentions and the breaking of unity that comes really through sin, through certain types of sin, pride, our personal anger, our personal selfishness, these types of things that come into the world. So I think the best way to cover this, kind of like we did, or blessed are the meek, where we really contrast it like this is what a peacemaker is not. This is the opposite of a peacemaker. Sometimes it's a good way to understand it, just like we talked about. The opposite of meek is that covetous man, using the original word, the Greek word pleonexia, not so much in our language. So in this case, when you're talking about, here in this proverb, it says, where there is no wood, the fire goes out. A very good illustration. And where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. As burning coals and wood to the fire, so is a contentious man that kindles strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down in the inmost body. So, two types of people that are the opposite of peacemakers that actually cause problems, cause fights, cause uproars and contention wherever they go. One is just a contentious man. Somebody that just, by their nature, just picks fights and starts problems and gets other people riled up. And then a talebearer, somebody that kind of just is a big talker, secretly goes around and gossips and say, did you hear what this person is? And secretly, hey, this person's so bad and all that. Really two types of people that cause all this. And God says he hates it. It's one of the things that God specifically says he hates. He hates all these things. Now, I didn't quote the whole verse, but the things that actually cause fights and contentions: a proud look, pride; hands that shed innocent blood; feet that are swift to run in evil, like people that go off half-cocked. Their feet are swift to run and do evil, to assume the worst, to jump into situations, to cause fights without really looking fully into the matter. And, of course, liars. And then one who sows discord among the brethren. These are all characteristics of people that are opposite of peacemakers. So understanding this, the pride, the selfish ambition. Let's just list a few of these. It says, by pride comes nothing but strife. So I keep saying pride. We're going to get to this in a minute, maybe when we talk about the anger and all that, but the intention is not of causing a dispute. It's not to protect somebody. It's not to solve some problem. It's not to correct something that's going to get worse, but it's just to be right. Just to put your foot down and say, no, you're wrong, I'm right about that. It's a way of really lifting ourselves up. It's because it doesn't have a purpose beyond ourselves. And so, hatred, again, is another thing that stirs up strife, but love covers all sin. So It's not God's. It's not a hatred for sin. It's not God's perfect judgment, but our own mixed motives, our own selfishness getting in there for an irrational hatred towards those pet things that we especially don't like, that falls far short of God's perfect standards. And then, of course, just basic anger. A soft answer, here's a peacemaker. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. A peacemaker is trying to solve problems, not trying to just be right or create problems. So these things that we're seeing here are going to be part of some of the first of the strict commands we're going to see, the 6 antitheses we're going to see in the Sermon on the Mount, beginning with anger. But why is this so important to God? A bunch of things, but God hates it so much because of this situation. The beginning of this strife is like releasing water. I mean, you dump a big bucket of water on the floor, you're not getting that water back, right? You're not ending the strife that you've caused. You've caused a breach, and you can't undo it anywhere near as easily as you destroyed it, right? It would be like me knocking over this TV, which is a mere move of the hand, right? And to think that I could put together the TV as easy as it was to knock this thing over and break it. Well, no, I need a whole factory that makes TVs. I can't put it together. But boy, it sure is easy to knock it over and break it, right? That's the idea here. Or a brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. So, because God hates this so much, and He's against it because you just can't dial it back. Things get ruined. Things get messed up. And that's why God loves peacemakers so much, because they're doing His work. He wants to rebuild. He wants to renew. He wants to take the destruction that's in the world and put things together again. Bring real healing without overlooking sin and without overlooking oppression and people being treated unfairly. It has nothing to do with overlooking such things. But when you're angry with sin or some kind of injustice or something, you're trying to fix a problem. It's not your own personal peak, right? And that's the difference. So I think Jesus' brother James really nails it down more. And this is any kind of argument or anything. It says that who is wise and understanding among you? In the sense that we're arguing about doctrine. We're arguing about the truth. Who's really right? Who's the wisest here? He says, if you're really wise, let him show it by his good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your heart, do not boast and lie against the truth. That means whatever principle, whatever doctrine, whatever important thing that you're trying to defend, if it's out of envy or self-seeking because you just want to show that you know more or you're right or whatever, it has nothing to do with the wisdom of God. James says it's a lie. Your very attitude could be a lie. If you're right about something, your very attitude about the situation could be the lie against that truth itself, because it makes it look like just your personal thing. It takes God's truth and it drags it down to your own level, right? So James says this wisdom, when it's based on envy and self-seeking, does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and even demonic. That's what he says. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. And then he contrasts it with the two wisdom. I should have made this 2 slides, sorry. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure. It's not mixed with our own motives. It's not all mixed up with our own, pet peeves and desires. But it's really pure. It's really truly from God's perspective, truly in a proportion that God sees right and wrong, truly on the right place in God's list of priorities. And so it's first pure, but then having been pure, then after that it's settled, it's peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. That's what the true wisdom is. It's the opposite of our flesh, and it's peaceable, it's persuasive, it's working with people to get, because you're not caring about, man, that was just the dumbest thing I ever heard. I need to let it out. I mean, that is so stupid. It's like, no, this thing that this person stinking, I can see that this is going to mess them up. It's going to mess somebody up. It's going to cause some harm. And I want to move this person to the right position. And that takes a lot of thinking about the best way to do it. When is the best time? When is this person the most likely to receive what I'm trying to say? You have to consider all those things. And so Jesus' brother James just sums it up. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace. That means you're sowing righteousness. You're actually making the world full of sin a more righteous place by your loving, guided by the Holy Spirit wisdom approach here. You're sowing righteousness. It's sown in peace by those who make peace. So that pretty much defines the whole peacemaker thing here. And I just want to say one more thing, is that when people have bad attitudes about things or stereotypes about Christians, I mean, a lot of times the strongest argument we can have, this is going to sound like something dumb, but let me just say that. A lot of times the strongest argument we can have is to be the opposite of that stereotype. Do you understand? If people think, well, you type of person, you always say this or you always do that, to be the opposite of what they're expecting or to not be what they're expecting is a lot of times the most persuasive argument that you can make, okay? At some point you're going to have to lay down, and God's going to give you the time to say what you need to say. I'm not saying, use words only when necessary or something dumb like that. But what I'm saying is it's been very real in my life, very, very real. And it's a powerful argument. So Beatitude number 8, I'm calling it 8A. I got this A and B here because there's two more Makarios as blessed. There's two more blessed as this or that. So you could say that's non-Beatitudes if you mark them by that, but these two are really talking about the same thing. So I'm just going to treat this as Beatitude 8, and A and B. So it says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So here we get back to you can only peacemake so much. This is making clear. At some point you have to lay it down, let say the truth, and because of that, people are not going to like it. This is the situation where people are saying peace, peace, but there is no peace. And you're living the truth, and you're saying the truth, and you're not yielding like we're hearing a lot of people are just yielding and giving in or whatever, which is absolutely terrible. And that is the message that the world needs to hear, that we're just not giving in to this nonsense. We're not going to do anything to endorse it in any possible way. Yes, Justine?
Why does it say, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, every single time?
Well, it does not say that every single time. As a matter of fact, the one right before it, which is way back here because I got so many slides, it says they shall be called the sons of God. That's not the same as saying for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There is one that does say for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and that's the blessed are the meek. Well, no, the meek will inherit the earth. So there's somebody, which I don't remember, that does say that. Unfortunately, I don't have last week's slides, but let's just look.
What's blessed are the poor? What's blessed are the poor?
It's probably the first one. I think you're right, but let's just get this right. So Matthew 5 in the physical Bible here. Yeah, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There you go. And then it says a bunch of other stuff. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Every time it's the opposite of what you would expect. And here, the reason it says it here is the same as the reason it says blessed are the poor, because in every case, the blessing is a compliment or perhaps the opposite of what is being said. So if you're meek, for example, if you're merciful, you'll be shown mercy. That clearly goes together. If you're meek, basically you're not always putting your own interests ahead of everybody's, and so you may kind of not really inherit what's truly yours, right? But God says the meek are going to inherit the earth. Here, you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, so you're getting the butt end of the stick here. You're getting the bad end of things. But Jesus says, even though it looks like you're at the bottom, you're very low, you're being persecuted. In fact, you're the ones that have the whole kingdom, and you're going to get the kingdom. So, in answer to your question, why, it's the way these Beatitudes are structured. If you're hungry, you're going to get the opposite of that. You're going to get filled. If you're meek, you may not get your inheritance, but you're going to inherit the earth. If you're persecuted, you're at the very bottom of the barrel, but you're going to, the whole kingdom belongs to you. That's why. Okay. That's the first part of it. The next blessing is, blessed are you when they revile. I want you to pay attention to the way this is worded very carefully. Okay. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So here's what I wanted to ask. When you read this, does this sound like something like a Chinese prison, or being burned alive by ISIS because you're a Christian or something like that? I mean, what's the main focus of what's happening here as you read through this? They revile, they say all kinds of evil against you falsely. I mean, how would you describe this? It's kind of what we normally think about when we talk about persecution, but in a way it's not, because it's mostly about words. So when we think of persecution, like I'm saying, we're thinking about the Chinese prison or something, right? But this is defining it. Now, the actual word persecute is the one that really corresponds to that. You know, that's that diokitso, I think. You know, which has a lot of meanings, but it mainly means to harass or cause a problem for somebody, persecute because of, especially for their belief, or to kind of drive somebody away or drive them out. That's especially what it means. But it can be very severe, but for the most part, this is what we all experience today here in this country, really, in our own world as Christians. That people they have bad ideas about. They make us look bad in the media and everywhere else. They put out all kind of ridiculous stereotypes. This is all going on right now. That's kind of what it's talking about. You understand? Revile, that word is when you kind of insult somebody in a particular way that really caused them to lose standing or lose status. So it's a kind of an attack. It's verbal, it's an insult, but it's calculated, it's done. This is really what this means. It's done in such a way to lower that person's status so they're not going to recover. They're not going to recover the position they had of respect with people they had before or anything like that because of the way you're doing it. Okay. Now, the way we're presented in the media and everything else, this is actually happening. You understand? This is real, and so Jesus says there's a blessing for this. So what I'm saying is, speaking evil against us falsely, reviling, saying, you're haters, you're this, you're that, all these things, that's the normal course that always takes place. It's not always going to be the Chinese prisoner being burned alive or something like that. You understand? But it's clear here that rejoice and be exceedingly glad, Jesus says, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Again, all very much rooted in the Old Testament. And of course, this is one of the four that Luke has, his version too, so I'll give Luke's version. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and revile you and cast out your name. Again, they're not physically beating you up in this case, they're just excluding you. They're, ostracizing you, this type of thing. Reviling. Cast out your name as evil. You're a bad person. You're a hater. For the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy. For indeed your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. Again, in Luke here, it's mostly verbal attacks, right? Or just propaganda attacks, for example, like you'll see in movies and that type of thing. That wasn't back then, but it's obviously greatly intensified in this day and age. And which will inevitably, most certainly lead to real physical attacks, But again, the big example, at least the big example, Tucker Carlson or other people are given is like, Rwanda, right? Before there was, gosh, I think it must have been, I don't know, 200,000 or 300,000 people macheted, killed, right, attacked. It was all people getting on the radio and saying, these people are bad, these people are so terrible, go kill them, go do this, go do that, really. Really out of envy, But that, it starts there. This is where it starts, with stereotypes, with words, with propaganda, with negative portrayals in the media, always the hypocritical, fat preacher, just whatever, you know what I'm saying? Just all these stereotypes that they put in there, that are there. Now, Luke has got a way more abbreviated version of this, but he does have something that Matthew doesn't have, and he's got some woes to go with the Beatitudes. So let's go through Luke's woes. So what I'm doing with Luke's woes is that even though, like you see that this is verse 20 and this is verse 24, so Luke does his 4 blessings first, and then having finished his 4 blessings, he does 4 corresponding woes. But I'm kind of putting them together here, right? So the first woe is to the rich. These are all for people that are doing well in some way or the other, basically. So the woe of the rich is, woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. And this is something Jesus said a lot, but Luke tends to emphasize it, is that what you don't want is to get your reward and your consolation now. You don't want to get all the good things now, because then you're not getting it in heaven. It's better to get your reward in heaven than it is to get it on earth now. And of course, Luke's given all these woes to people that are doing well versus people that are suffering. But he's doing it in the saying that there's going to be a reckoning. There's going to be a day of judgment. God is going to set all things right. I mean, this is very different from kind of the Marxist or the wokester or something like that, which when they get rich themselves, I mean, a lot of times we'll say it's hypocritical or whatever. They have all these mansions or whatever. But really, in a sense, their whole vision is earthly, and they're just saying, hey, I think I should have it instead of you. I think you should suffer, and I should be wealthy instead of you being wealthy and I'm suffering. So in that sense, it's kind of what they're really saying. They want the right people to have good things and the wrong people to have bad things. So in a sense, it's not really hypocritical. It's really what they want. But Luke is very different. Luke is pointing to a future where the absolute justice of God is going to be done. So the first woe is to those who are rich now. The well-fed is the second woe. He says, blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. But he says, woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. This is again like out of Mary's Magnificat. And so God is not going to put up for us having a complete lack of concern for those people that are suffering around suffering around us. He ultimately is not going to put up with that. Luke's the third woe is the happy. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will warn and weak. Again, you're getting your consolation now instead of in the kingdom of heaven. This is a very sober thing, right? And we talked about this extensively before, even about the guy in Ezekiel with the scroll writing down everybody that's mourning and sighing about all the sins and abominations that are being done in Jerusalem before God destroys it. He's kind of protecting them. It's the same concept here. And the fourth woe, the popular. So again, this is mostly verbal or social, but blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and revile you and cast out your name. We already read that. But then he says, woe to you when all men speak well of you. A good thing to see about people out there. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Everybody liked the false prophets because they spoke smooth things that everybody wanted to hear, right? So again, as we read this last Beatitude, Luke's woes, but also the last Beatitude, blessed are you when men persecute you. It does cause us to evaluate our priorities. We need to really consider this, Obviously, we've lost a republic. We're under a tyranny. The country's in a very bad place. It's easy to mourn that. But we need to, especially if you're my age and you're, kind of like in Ezra, the people that saw the old temple and now he was here now. It's a very mournful experience. But in light of all that Luke and Jesus and all that is saying here, we have to really evaluate our priorities. Are we really feeling woe about something we should be so woeful about? You know, I think that's a good thing to think about when we go through this. But we're done with the Beatitudes. We're still in this first section of Matthew about what kind of people make up the kingdom. And here's our mission. You are the salt. This is where the unsavory salt comes from. But you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. So, I'll just ask everybody here, what do y'all think it means that we're the salt of the earth? Any thoughts?
I've read a bunch of commentaries on this, and I'm always a little bit confused about it.
Really?
I mean, kind of.
About the unsavory salt and all that?
Well, the part where, I've heard all these really deep explanations, and I wonder about them.
Well, it's not really that deep. I mean, what was salt used for in the ancient world?
They had these little bags that I don't know.
No, we don't need to go all that. I mean, what was the basic, before refrigeration, what was the basic use of salt? Right. It is a preservative. It's from corruption. And what do you have to do with salt to keep things from being corrupt, or to keep things from utterly rotting? You need to really pack it in and diffuse it everywhere, right? It needs to be well spread all over the place. It's got to be really, that meat has got to be like completely saturated in salt, right? So, I mean, I think that's the basics. How do you become? The reason I kept saying it's just so funny. I mean, one of the accounts of from Plymouth or the Pilgrims or something like that. There's a story where it's not a story. It's an account of this. This guy was kind of this really floppish guy or whatever. He was causing all this trouble, kind of like a Zachary Smith kind of guy in Lost in Space. But he was going around causing all this trouble and making all these problems. And he finally got caught. And it's like they had all the receipts. They had all these letters he had written and all these statements. And they read it to it. They finally called him up and read it to him. And he said, I confess it all. I'm nothing but unsavory salt. You know, this is so funny. I mean, the way it was worded or whatever. But that's actually coming from here. But the thing is, what does it mean to lose the seasoning? It means to compromise, right? It's like all these weenies that we were talking about earlier this evening when we were eating, and they're kind of giving in, to whatever, being all gay, whatever they were giving into and being broken down right away. It's like when you do that, you're seeking peace through compromise, and it's going to lead to ultimate total rejection because you're so utterly useless. And that's why it says when we lose what we are, when we lose what we're about, our Christian life, including loving our enemies, including, not just being selfish but unselfish, including, rebuilding the things that are falling apart, we just become utterly useless and just a big joke, right? Like, who's the Jane? I can't even remember the guy, the Jane Austen preacher, but we kind of become like that. I can't remember the guy's name. Mr. Collins, I think. Or so, but again, it says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. It gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light." Think about this statement. "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Right? How does that compare? Does anybody know kind of beforehand what we're going to read in Matthew chapter 6 about prayer and fasting and giving alms and everything like that? Well, yeah, it does say that, but does this this says, "Let your light so shine before men so that they may see the good that you do." How does that line up with chapter 6 there, which we're talking about? Do it secret, do it private. And think about this. Well, like a lot of things here, intention is important. What was happening What we're going to read about in Matthew 6 is basically virtue signaling, as people are trying to make themselves look good by these ostentatious displays. They're trying to show everybody, I'm worthy, I'm good. It's self-focused. It's to increase your status, increase people's opinion of you, to get honor from man. But here, the whole thrust is something totally different. You're trying to make sure that God gets the glory. Your light shine, your light, because God's in our life. So shine before men that they may see your good works and not say how good you are, how great a guy you are, like the Pharisees wanted in chapter 6, but glorify your Father in heaven. That's the issue. I want to just mention a few things about this. Just give some real life examples. First of all, going back to the salt. Okay, as it being really packed in to be that preservative. Okay, so one thing that God has greatly blessed us with, obviously, is homeschooling, and we look at it and we wonder, like, I mean, how can any parent, knowing just how utterly, just rotten and putrefying the public schools have come to send their kids, it's insane to me. How could you do that? You know what they're going to hear there. You know they're going to be turned against you, like some Stalinists or whatever. And so, but that's all true, but there was like a massive pullout of us too. So here's what happened, okay? I just want you to picture like what's actually happened in our society. Like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, there were just constant fights about what was going on in school, creation versus evolution, sex education, this or that, all these things. There were just constant battles, constant fights, and we were all, as believers, we were all getting denounced for that, and you're trying to impose your religion on everybody, and blah blah blah, right? And all this was going on, and we were like, fine. It was like, we're out of here, and it was wonderful. I mean, it was God's blessing. We're able to hold school. I mean, there's no way anybody should be doing anything else now, but there was a consequence to that. It's like sometime around the middle of the 90s, all those conflicts over school just went dark. They just stopped. They disappeared. As all the people that really cared about it pulled out, all those conflicts just went completely off the radar. And until COVID, like, just all the, kind of the parents that kind of stuck with it and didn't really know what was going on like we did. All of a sudden they saw what was going on, and I'm like, I can't believe this. I can't believe how bad these schools are. And all of a sudden it became all these fights about it and all these issues. Well, what happened? Well, it was necessitated, but all the salt came out, right? And we can't deny that. So part of it is you'd run for a school board or something, and people are like, hey, you don't have kids in this public school. Well, why are you on the school board or whatever? Well, we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We're like, look, I'm on this board because I don't want other people to get hurt by all this garbage, right? And I don't have my kids in there. Maybe when you fix it, I will, whatever. But like, look, this is there should be no shame about that. But I think it was we just had such a good deal going that we stopped caring about all the rot out there. It's like, just let it rot, let it burn, whatever. That was kind of the attitude. And so, but that was a real example of that salt being pulled out, I think. Okay. Now, the city on a hill. This is a very powerful thing I went through in my own life. So let me just set up this. It's something that, it was an illustration that God gave me, and I wanted to, even though it's going to put us, behind schedule and all that, I really want to go through this. So I know it began in mission school in Singapore years ago, in our ultimately doomed attempt to be missionaries. We kind of started in this school in Singapore, and we were just going through all this stuff, like all these things you needed to do to, like, maybe reach a few Muslims, all these ways you needed to present it, and it's just all this very difficult and complicated thing, and maybe, like, in some very hard country, like 5 of them would become believers or something like that, right? And at the same time, we were seeing, like, places like Latin America, there was these big, huge revivals taking place and large numbers of people getting saved. The contrast couldn't be starker, right? And and really that's your those are your chances of getting saved one way or the other, right? Why was this happening? Well, in my mind, like this was kind of a turning point in my life because it was the point where I stopped, in a sense, I stopped believing in this ideal of primitive Christianity that I had. Like, it used to be this perfectly pure thing that was separate from the world. Then Constantine came in, and it all got corrupted, and all this, and there was nothing good that came out of that. And the only real Christians kind of went up in the Alps, or all this kind of things that I used to believe is evangelical. And I'm thinking, okay, why is it so hard? Why are your chances of getting saved out of hell so low if you're in this part of the world, and so much better? Your chance is so much better in another part of the world. Well, ultimately, a lot of times, it was whether somebody won a war somewhere or not, right? I mean, what happened in Latin America that made it now in the 80s or whatever relatively easy for these revivals to be happening? Well, all I really got is Spanish conquistadors. I mean, no way is that a great representation of the gospel. I mean, it was horrible, right? And yet, it still made a difference. And if that's the case, how much more does our involvement in society around us are going to make a difference? And here's how it was brought home to me. Like right after I was thinking all these things and kind of changing the way I'd always thought, and the worth of trying to save things like this republic we just lost here in the U.S., right? That as I would go through these things, why it was worthy of being saved. Not long after that, we had a course at our headquarters, right? And it began in August, and it ended at the end of November, like right around Christmas. So I was there in August, and we were like in we were staying in this real old, like castle-like building. And they had this room like near where the dorms were, where there was this great big window, and you were looking out. This was in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. So there was we were on top of a hill where George Washington's army had camped once, and there was a town called Fort Washington really behind that hill. And there's all these trees in between us and the town, right? And in August, those trees were full. I mean, that was a full leafed up forest between us and that town. And I remember sitting in that room and kind of turning off all the lights to spend time with God, because it's like what I like to do. And all I could see on the other side through that hill is this one barely little red light just blinking, like off of a satellite phone tower or something like that, just blinking like that. That's all you could see. It was pitch black. And I was thinking to myself, man, in a lot of parts of the world, this is all people see, right? The only chances they have of believing in Jesus and going to heaven and getting forgiveness of their sins, through the salvation that Jesus made for us, is they can somehow see that far away little bitty blinking beacon through all the blackness and kind of hold on to it and follow it out and know what it means. And I was like, man, this is bad. This is terrible. I hope we can be good mission. I hope we can really do something, And I was thinking all these things. And time went on. We got to the end of the class. I went to go see some family members for Thanksgiving. Came back up to that place in Pennsylvania. And had forgotten all this and sat in that same room. But now it's like after Thanksgiving. It's like around December or whatever. So what do you think happened into that forest in the meantime? Now is all the leaves were gone. Everything was stripped. And I just looked through that window, and you saw this whole massive town just lit up like Exxon. You know what I'm saying? Like a refiner. I mean, it was just all lit up. You could just see everything through those trees. That is the difference. When we truly represent God's glory as a church, as a community of believers, as a city on a hill, that's how much more chance people have of really getting saved. It's very difficult to almost impossible for people to get, especially, people that kind of have it together, maybe, but people whose lives are very messed up and all that is near impossible outside of a strong, functioning Christian community with a strong, functioning, well-functioning Christian culture with a culture of evangelism and everything else and discipline in place. It's very hard for them to get saved. It's almost impossible. It would have been for me. Without this whole movement going on at the time that I became a believer, it never would have happened. And so that's what this means when it says, you are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill. I mean, I literally saw this, cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So, and we're going to end here, but just this is what the Old Testament vision was under the law. When God gave the law on Mount Sinai and Moses is reminding everybody what happened, Moses said this, surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Therefore be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. That was the Old Testament law. If we as a church, which we're not a church, I mean in our churches, can truly exemplify everything Jesus was preaching on the Sermon on the Mount, then the peoples will have something. They'll have that city on the hill, that true example to see, which was the Sermon on the Mount was Jesus' Sinai at a whole other level, because now the whole world is being let in and reached. All right. And with that said, we'll stop the recording and have a time of discussion with any questions or